Good day, grade 12 learners. Welcome to today's economics lesson. My name is Gabriel Letiani, and this lesson is once again brought to you by Gauteng Department of Education in partnership with Saibono Discovery Center and broadcast by Pagama Research and Development Center. With me today, it's Liam Fukeng, who will be responsible for answering our WhatsApp questions during the lesson presentation. So remember to send all those questions that you have on the following number 060-667-5044. Send all those relevant questions that you might have on the number 060-667-5044. Thank you so much. And then today's lesson or today's topic, we're going to be discussing the new economic paradigm. Right. As you've seen, always when we start our lessons, we touched what we call the content progression. In grade 10, you've touched on the time series and composition, the reasons for business cycles, and the effects thereof. And then in grade 11, you do not touch the content, but in grade 12 now, already we've covered the composition and the features of the business cycles. We explained yesterday the causes of the business cycle, the type of the business cycles, and we also explained the different government policies that are there. And in today's lesson, therefore, we're going to be touching on the new economic paradigm. That is how to smooth out the fluctuations in the business cycle. Then every time when we start with terminology, where you're supposed to make yourself familiar with these terminologies. Remember, grade 12 learners, the terminologies are very important to help you to pass, especially when it comes to your section A. Because these terminology questions, you can find them in the multiple choice question where you need to choose one correct answer. You can also find them in the match column where you need to choose the correct answer. Then they can also help you to answer question 1.3 where we say to you, give the correct concept or the correct terminology for the following statement. I'll make an example with deregulation. You'll be given a question under 1.3 to say, the removal of laws, regulations, and other forms of government controls that interfere in the markets. Then your answer there will be deregulation. So these terminologies, as you practice, as you are doing your test and everything, please make sure that you master these terminologies because they can also help you. And also again in section B, where you'll be asked to briefly describe the concept. So if you're not familiar with the terminologies, it will be difficult for you to describe those concepts. That is why every time when we start our lessons, we start with the concepts. Today's topic, like once I said to you, it's the new economic paradigm. So definition of this, what is the new economic paradigm? Remember, yesterday we discussed the business cycle and then we discussed the government policies that are applicable for the business cycle. We mentioned that government policies, we can use the monetary policy, we can use the fiscal policy. Depending on which phase of the business cycle we are, we can either apply contractionary phase. Whether we're in the contractionary phase, we can increase government spending, reduce taxation, or affect money supply and interest rates. If we are in the expansionary phase, we can also apply the monetary policy and the fiscal policy in a form of we can increase taxation, reduce government spending so that we can control demand thereof. So it refers to the government policies that are designed to ensure a high economic growth without having supply constraints and without having inflation problems. That is the economic paradigm. Then if we explain it further, we are saying it discourages the policymakers from using the monetary policy and the fiscal policy to fine-tune the economy, but rather it encourages them to achieve stability through sound long policies, decisions relating to demand and supply. So rather than every time when the economy is at the peak, we'll apply the monetary policy and the fiscal policy, and then when the economy is at the trough, again we'll apply the monetary policy and the fiscal policy. That policymakers discourage the use of those things, but they encourage us to do what we call long-term sound policies that are relating to demand and supply. That is our definition of the new economic paradigm or paradigm. Right, then we said traditional monetary and fiscal policies focuses on demand. This relying on these policies is reflected as a demand side approach. And then demand side approach refers to measures undertaken by the government to influence aggregate demand in the economy. The government uses the monetary and the fiscal policy to achieve this goal. How? Remember, when the economy is at the peak, it means now people have got money to spend. The demand for goods and services increases, so spending it is more. So when the demand for goods and services increases, production or supply also have to react. And if it does not react, the prices are going to increase so that we can reduce what? The demand. On the other side, if the economy is at the trough or the economy is not doing well at the recession, the government will try to reduce taxation. Why does the government reduce taxation? So that people can have more disposable income. And we know that once you have got more disposable income, what is going to happen to demand? Demand for goods and services, it is going to increase. That is why we're saying this fiscal policy and the monetary policy, they are focused on aggregate demand. That is why we call them the demand side approach. And then for government to achieve that, they'll have to use the monetary and the fiscal policy. But with the new economic paradigm, that is discouraged. We want to develop long-term sound policies that are relating to demand and supply. When households, firms, and governments spend more, aggregate demand in the economy increase. But that is a problem because that leads to inflation. That leads to inflation. And if we look at under our demand side policies now, a question might say to you, discuss the demand side policies, or what are the demand side policies? We are realizing that the first one, it is inflation. Aggregate demand increase more quicker than aggregate supply. This causes prices to increase. And if supply does not react to the increase in demand, obviously the prices will increase. This will lead to inflation. And then the definition of inflation, it is a sustained and a considerable increase in the general price levels. That is the definition of inflation. So whenever prices keeps on increasing, and what causes those prices to increase? It is the demand. That is why we are saying we are focusing on the demand side policies. Having more disposable income, more demand for consumer goods and services. The problem is this now. We expect supply also to react. If supply does not react, but there is a continued increase in demand, therefore, obviously the prices are going to increase. And when the price increase, we know that is what? That is inflation, of which we don't want that because now, imagine if there's a shortage of bread, but every day in the morning when we wake up, we need to have some coffee, we need to have some tea, but it does not go alone. We need to have it with a loaf of bread. So therefore, you go to a bakery, and then when you go to a bakery, there is only 10 loaf of bread as being produced in the day before or currently. But the question is that in your neighborhood, how many of those households consume or eat bread in the morning? I'm sure you are saying that there are many of them. So the consumption of bread, if the production is only 10 loaves of bread, but the demand for bread, it is 100 and so on. So the supplier, for the supplier to limit the demand, they've got no choice but to increase that price of bread up until where supply is equal to demand. But if it has not reached at that point, the prices will keep on increasing. The prices will keep on increasing because there is an increase in demand, and that on its own leads to inflation. That is the demand side policies. Then let's explain it in a form of a graph. It's a basic demand and supply graph. So what are we saying is that there is the supply of bread and there is a demand of bread. And then the equilibrium point there, it means now the quantity demanded is equal to the quantity supplied at the agreed price. So the economy is at the equilibrium there. However, we don't want it to be stationary. We want the economy to grow. And for the economy to grow, GDP must increase. Remember now when we were doing circular flow, we provided definition of GDP. We said gross domestic product, it is the total final value of all goods and services produced within the borders of a country. So if production increases, it tells us that the economy is increasing. Therefore, for GDP to increase, demand must increase, because we cannot produce 1,000 loaves of bread while the demand is only 10. It can't be. So if the demand for loaf of bread is more, it tells us, or it tells me as a supplier, that no, because the demand for loaf of bread it is more, what should happen to production? I should increase the production thereof. And then when I increase the production of bread, automatically the GDP also increase. At this point, the demand and supply are at equilibrium. But the question is, what then happens if demand increases? Look at now. You see that now that originally we had our equilibrium there, where D1 was equal to S. That is where we were. It means at that point the economy was at equilibrium, the price was P1 and the quantity was Q1. So people have got disposable income, there is more money, people are now working. Then there's an increase in demand. You can see that there is a shift of the demand curve. It is going to shift from D to D1. That shows an increase. Therefore, if demand increases, we also expect the supply. We also expect supply to increase from S2 to S1. But according to this, we are realizing that it does not change. We are realizing that supply remains at S. It has not moved to S1. So what will then happen? This is great, but if supply does not increase and D1 moves from D1 to D2, but the price will have to increase from P1 to P2. Why? In this case, there is an increase in demand. It moves from D1 to D2, but supply that did not react. And for us to limit the demand, we've got no choice as suppliers to increase the price. That is why you see the movement there. The price increase from P to P1. We are trying to control the demand. But if the demand keeps on increasing, maybe up until D3, definitely we can see that the price is going to increase again from P2 to P3. And then the demand again increases, demand continues to increase, but supply, it is not reacting. So therefore we are saying, if supply does not react to demand, this is bad because it leads to inflation. So we don't want an economy where supply does not react to demand. And therefore, what is the desirable output? Or what do we wish for? What do we wish for? We're saying if demand increase, we expect supply also to do what? To increase. We expect supply also to increase. So if you can look at this graph now, we had our original price at P, and then the original equilibrium there at E, of which demand was equal to supply. People have got more disposable income. There we can see a shift in the demand curve. It increases from D2 to D1. But in this phenomena, this is very great. This is what we want. Because as you can see, what did supply do? Supply reacted to the increase in demand. Supply also increased from S2 to S1. That is why you look at those arrows there. And then if it increases, and then look at the price, the movement, the price remains constant. It does not change in this case because the demand is equals to supply. This is what we want in the economy. We want a point where any increase in demand for certain goods and services, supply should equivalently react to that. In that way, we'll be able to do what? To control the inflation. So this is the desirable output where we want an increase in demand, supply should react and increase it. So economics learners, if you are asked to say, with an aid of a graph, illustrate, show the demand and supply on how to control inflation, or show how inflation is controlled with an aid of a demand and a supply curve. You'll explain it, draw the original demand curve, which is D and S, show the equilibrium point, show the price there, and show the quantity there. Then you explain it to say, an increase in demand from D to D1. We expect supply also to react from S2 to S1 without affecting the what? The price, with the price being constant. In that way, we would have achieved what we want in terms of our economic policies or in terms of our new economic paradigm. All right, another further when we explain it, inflation is prevented if aggregate supply increases when aggregate demand increases. They should also increase simultaneously. And then this is done by the use of the supply side policies. Then another demand side policy now, it is this phenomenon which is unemployment. Demand side policies are effective in stimulating economic growth, and then economic growth, it refers to increase, or it refers to the production of goods and services. It is similar to GDP. So therefore, when there's a demand, we know that the economy is growing. And let's say economic growth increases the demand for labor, because production cannot work on its own. For production to take place, it means people have to be hired. And then if people are hired, we know that that is economic growth, which later will lead to economic development. So the hiring of people, or the demand for people, has an effect on unemployment. It means if more people are employed, unemployment reduces as such. That is why we will see a decrease in unemployment. But as unemployment decreases, inflation on the other side starts to increase. So you can see that there's an inverse relationship now. More people are working. When people are working, what is happening to demand? Demand for consumer goods and services increases. And we know that when demand for consumer goods and services increase, but we have not yet planned that in terms of supply, that will lead to inflation. So now, the question that I would ask you, economics learners, is it good for people to be unemployed so that we can have less inflation? Or is it good that people can be employed so that we can have more inflation? Which one is good between those two? Right. And then to explain that is illustrated, or that phenomena is illustrated by the Phillips curve. The Phillips curve shows or illustrates the relationship between unemployment and inflation. To say, if unemployment decreases, what is happening to inflation? Or if inflation increases, what is happening on the other side to unemployment? That phenomena is represented by the Phillips curve. Remember, this is another term that can be asked as a terminology. To say, we can ask you to say, briefly give us or provide the following, the concept or economic terminology for the following: the relationship between unemployment and inflation. As an economics learner, your answer will be the Phillips curve. Then we can also ask you as a 2-mark question to say, briefly describe the concept Phillips curve. Then you are going to say, it illustrates the relationship between unemployment and inflation. Let's explain that with an aid of a graph. You draw your graph again, economics learners. On the x-axis, always as represented by unemployment rate. And then on the y-axis, that shows your inflation. So unemployment, if it is at point B, which is 7%, we can see that inflation starts to kick in from 0. It goes to 2%. That is where we are, right? But our main aim in the economy is that people should be employed. So therefore, it is to reduce the level of unemployment. Unemployment should not continue to be higher. Unemployment should be reduced. But let's see then, if there's a reduction in unemployment, let's see what happens to inflation. Right? At point B, we have that. Then at point A now, we can see there's a movement in the Phillips curve. Unemployment decreases from 7% to 4%, which is a good thing. It shows that we are managing. It shows that people are working. They will depend less on the government. They will be able to buy consumer goods and services. Standard of living for those people start to improve, and they have a better life. They can be able to pay for healthcare. They can be able to pay for education because there's a reduction in unemployment. However, contrary to that is that once that happens, look at inflation now. Inflation increases from 2 where up until 5%. That is the movement on the A line. It moves from 2% to 5%. So as much as we are trying to solve unemployment, there's another problem that the country is facing on the other side, which is the increase in inflation. That increased from 2% to 5%. There is an inverse relationship between unemployment and inflation. It means there's a trade-off there. If you want to manage inflation, inflation has to be reduced. It means at some point, automatically unemployment is going to increase. But if unemployment decreases, inflation automatically is going to increase. So they don't go in the same direction, or they are not directly proportional. There's an inverse relationship in that way. When the other one increases, the other one decreases. Those are the demand side policies. The government can choose how much of unemployment they wish to trade off for inflation. Then it means under the demand side policies, you've got two concepts there, which is inflation, which is the general increase or considerable increase in the price of goods and services. Then you've got an unemployment there, which is the number of people that are not working. Then we realize that there's an inverse relationship under the demand side policies. So if we look at the supply side policies now, because remember we said if demand increases, supply have to react to that. So let's look at the supply side policies. Supply side policies refers to any measure undertaken by the government to influence the level of aggregate demand in the economy. The government can try to stimulate aggregate supply by the following three measures. Number one, they can reduce the cost of production. Number two, they can improve the efficiency of inputs. Number three, they can improve the efficiency of markets. So let's explain each concept on one by one to say what we mean when we say the government can reduce the cost of production. So cost of production means a greater output can be supplied at any given price level. It means now if for you to produce a certain good or a certain product, it is cheaper for you to produce that, there is no reason for you to overprice it because it is cheaper for you to produce it. It means now the price levels will be reasonable because the cost of production will be cheaper or will be less or could have been reduced. The government can roll out measures that can reduce the cost of production of businesses, whether it be directly or indirectly. Incentives in the form of subsidies, in the form of reduced taxes, all those measures the government can take place. E.g., modern infrastructure, efficient administration, less red tapes, and no corruption. All those things hamper us with supply. So under infrastructural services, transportation, communication, Water and energy costs often increase the cost of production. So if that can be reduced, so water and electricity, if the cost of electricity is higher, remember grade 12 learners, especially when we are producing, we need all the inputs to take place. If we want a loaf of bread, it is not only about flour and yeast. There is water there, which we are paying for to the municipality. There is cost of electricity there. So the final output or the final product, which is a loaf of bread, we should consider all the costs that were incurred in the production of such. So if all those things are found at the reasonable price, or if they are cheaper for us to do that, it means same applies, the output or the product that is to be sold, it will be sold at the price that is reasonable, at the price that won't be too much or the price that won't increase. That is what we want grade 12 learners. The government can make a significant contributions if charges are reasonable and services are efficient. We know when we talk about services such as transportation, sometimes the communication network is not well, and we don't get access to electricity, there's load shedding, companies close down, and so on. All those things, if they are reasonable, if they are efficient is how fast can we get them, or how fast can we produce something. If we find all those things, it means, therefore, supply output will be at a reasonable price, and therefore we won't have any problem in terms of inflation. Administrative costs, these are the costs which are not directly related to production of a certain good, e.g. your inspection costs, reports on application of various regulations, the bylaws, the tax returns, and provision of statistical information. All those things, they consume time, they take time, and they are costly. So if we can remove all those costs and we focus on supply of goods and services, the price or the output will be reasonable. The other concept now, it is improving the efficiency of input. So we need to understand what we mean by this. Efficiency, yes, we know that how fast can we get things available. So what are these inputs? Inputs, economics learners, we know those are all the tools that are used in the production process. All the tools that are used in the production process, it being capital, it being labor, it being other resources. If we can have them available at a faster time, at the reasonable price, then the supply will react to demand at a very good pace. Greater efficiency, it is usually achieved with incentive schemes and measures such as, number one, tax rates. Higher tax rates of personal income tax act as a disincentive to work. Higher personal tax rate. So you'll find that we've got skilled labor or skilled human resources. But because the personal income tax, it is very high, someone will be saying, why do I still need to continue producing, or why do I still need to work? Because I don't see the true value of my salary. If today I buy a loaf of bread, I pay for transport costs, I buy for electricity, all the money is gone. So there's no need for me to continue working. That is a supply factor. So if we can reduce the tax rates, if they can be reduced, and that will act as an incentive to work, and then supply will increase. Another factor, high corporate income tax act as a disincentive to invest because they increase the cost and reduces the net profits. You will realize that when we are preparing your financial statements, you must take your calculate your company tax, and the very same company tax that you've calculated, it must be submitted to SARS. So if the company tax, for example, it was sitting at 28%, and now in February, the Minister of Finance say the company tax will no longer be 28%, but it will now be 40%. In that regard, it means now the net profits are going to be less. So if the net profits are going to be less, you will end up not expanding as the business. You won't see the true value of why should I continue supplying this particular product, because I'm paying too much tax on it. And therefore, I will rather do what? discontinue the supplying of that product. That is why we see high corporate income tax as a what? As a disincentive to invest. Reason being, it increases the costs but reduces the what? The net profits. As an entrepreneur, you cannot start a business with an aim of not making a profit. But as an entrepreneur, you want to start a business of making a huge profit. But if the tax is higher, your profits are going to be less, then you will say, why should I continue supplying? So that is why we are saying efficiency of inputs should then be improved. Another one, high indirect taxes such as VAT act as a disincentive to produce because of increased what? Selling price. Remember now, businesses have what we call the cost of production, and then when they get that cost of production, which is GDP at basic prices, as you've done it when you're doing your national account aggregates, then you're going to add the taxes on products, you minus the subsidies on products, then we are going to have a GDP at market price, which is your selling price in this way. To say, if the taxes such as VAT are higher, automatically the end product is also going to be higher, which is going to reduce what? Which is going to be saying, why would I sell at a higher price? You cannot produce something that is not bought. Because if the selling price increases, some people are going to shift from buying that product and they're going to buy what you call substitute goods to that. So indirect taxes such as VAT act as a disincentive to produce because the selling price is higher, and then I need to produce water, or I need to produce, let me stick to the bread, I need to produce bread. If the selling price is higher, people won't buy bread. They will opt for other options of such as cereal, other options such as fat cakes. So a person or someone who's a baker, someone who's supplying bread, because they can see that the bread that I'm producing, they're not buying it. And they're not buying it just because of what? Because of a high VAT. So if that can be reduced, and then people are going to be buying the bread, and then the supply thereof, it is going to increase. Another one, capital consumption. The replacing of capital goods regularly creates opportunity for businesses to keep up with technological development. On the other side, there's capital goods that we are talking about. We talk about the machinery and the equipment that are used in the production process. So if also there's too much costs to hire them, we will find that you end up using worn out material, worn out equipment that will not help you to do what? To be efficient in terms of supplying. So if your equipment is old, it's going to be slow. If your machinery are old, are going to be slow. So people that have got a technological advantage will produce more than you are producing. But you'll find that even if you want to change, you want to buy faster equipment, faster machines, you cannot do that because of the costs that are higher. So if those costs are subsidized by government, if those costs are reduced as such, your capital goods will be available at a cheaper price. Then what happened to production? Production for goods and services will be more faster, you will have more output, and that output will react to demand. And if that reacts to demand, the prices won't change or the price won't increase. Then we are going to avoid having inflation. Depreciation allowances are subtracted from the gross profit before taxes are calculated, and therefore they reduce the amount of tax liability. Human resource development. There's another factor. The quality of labor can be improved by improving the healthcare, education, training, the mobility of labor. So if the training takes place, healthy workers tend to be more efficient than those who are not healthy. So now it means they can produce more goods than those who are not healthy. Trained workers who have got skills and expertise, they know how to meet the demand of for certain goods and services. They know how to increase the supply. That is why we are saying it is another factor where we're supposed to improve the efficiency of inputs. Another one is human resource development. If you have got trained and skilled workers, the demand and the supply, it is going to increase. We're going to have more output in that regard. Free advisory services. This promotes opportunity to export and establish businesses in foreign countries, improve the quality of human resource through the Skills Development Act. So we're talking about the free advisory services there. Research and development in South Africa should look for businesses, should market South African businesses in the outside world. So if they do that, it means therefore, even us here in South Africa will be able to come up with ideas to produce goods and services that can be exported to other countries. If we do that, the employment in our country increases, and then in that way, the country increases its GDP, the economy of the country increases as such. And that will also help us. And then it also says will also improve the quality of human resource through the Skills Development Act. Remember, I said to you the supply side policies consider 3 factors. Number 1, we said that is the reduction of cost of production. Number 2, improving the efficiency of inputs. Number 3, now it is improving the efficiency of markets. Right, the measures that can improve the efficiency of markets include deregulation. Remember, I said to you, the reason why we're underlining this is a terminology. Grade 12 learners, we can ask you as an economic concept to say removal of laws, regulations, and other forms of government controls that interfere in the market and the market's free. Then your answer that you're going to give us, you're going to say it is deregulation. So we should move away from all these red tapes, all these laws that are unnecessary for us to trade. If we can remove those, supply will start to react. E.g., the removal of prices, imports, and exchange controls. The other one is competition. Implementing measures that can increase competition by encouraging the establishment of new businesses. So therefore, if our competition it is at a measurable, there is no one who's got an upper hand more than the other. We will be able to have efficiency of markets. We'll have more goods and services that are available rather than creating monopolies, rather than creating oligopolies. Where you'll find that a certain product, it is only supplied by one person and there is no competition. In this regard, we can also see by our state-owned enterprises or parastatals. You will see that because there is only one company that is supplying a certain product and there is no competition, you will realize that there is no efficiency there. There is no quality there. Whatever they are supplying, it does not even come at the right quantity at the right time. So if ever we are saying, let there be competition, then the efficiency of markets can be improved. Then we said we should also encourage foreign direct investment. What is FDI? What is this foreign direct investment? Bring other businesses that come into South Africa, come and or bring investors from other countries to South Africa. They must come and establish businesses in South Africa. And in that way, when they establish businesses in South Africa, they hire the people of South Africa, they hire workers in South Africa. In that way, unemployment is reduced, but what is happening to the supply of goods and services, it is increased. That is why we're saying improving efficiency of markets. Removal of power imbalances such as monopolies and opportunity for collusion. Remember when I said monopolies, it is where you'll find that there's only one company that is supplying a certain product or a certain good. That on its own creates supply constraints. Leveling the playing field. Private businesses cannot compete with public enterprises. Public enterprises have what we call legislative protection and are supported by the government. That is why they are funded when they need funding. While on the other side, private companies have to look for their own investors. They will have to sell shares without any help from the government. That is where we are saying now, let that be leveled, where there's equality between private companies and there's equality between public companies. If public companies are subsidized, so does the private companies should be subsidized. The same legislative protection that public companies are enjoying, we expect the private companies also to enjoy the same. In that way, the playing field could have been leveled. Production will increase, supply will increase. Corruption and nepotism need to be dealt with vigorously wherever it occurs. We know that sometimes the output, it is not delivered, or we don't get the output at the right time because such a things as corruption and nepotism. You'll find out that under nepotism, you know this term, business studies, we also use it in economics, where you will realize that people are hired because of friendship, people are hired because of family, but in terms of production, in terms of work to be done, they do not have the skills or the expertise to do that. And then what is going to happen now? There's a continued demand, but supply, it is of poor quality because of unskilled and people who do not have who do not have expertise or the skills to do that. And corruption, we know about corruption, where we'll produce more or we'll produce less because we want to benefit a certain party or a certain person. Right, grade 12 learners, for today, that is our lesson. We'll stop here and we're going to take again 5 minutes break. Then we come back and then we do the questions thereof. Thank you so much for tuning in. That is where we stop for today. Remember, we're explaining the new economic paradigm, where we talked about demand side policies, where we talked about the supply side policies. Under demand side policies, we talked about inflation and unemployment. Under supply side policies, we talked about the reduction of cost, we talked about improving efficiency of inputs, we talked about improving the efficiency of markets. You should not only list those, but you should be able to discuss it with the relevant graphs. Thank you so much. Let's take that 5 minutes break. Thank you.
Welcome back, grade 12 learners. I'm Leah Mufukeng. Now we're going to look at some few typical examples of questions related to today's lesson only. The questions that we're going to look at are related only to the new economic paradigm to smooth out business cycles. Okay, when I was reading the WhatsApp messages, I came across a question which says, "Ma'am, can you please give us all multiple choice questions related to business cycles?" My tip or advice to you is that if you go back to past exam papers, you can use those multiple choice to practice to answer the questions relating to business cycles. Here is another example of a multiple choice question. The curve that illustrates the relationship between unemployment and inflation. So this year, when you are studying economics, you're going to be taught how to draw and interpret different types of graphs or curves. Already in the previous lesson, you learned about the multiplier. So you need to know each and every graph that is in the economics syllabus. So you need to even know what is illustrated by that particular graph. So for the topic of business cycles, there is only one graph which we use to explain the relationship between unemployment and inflation, and it is the Phillips curve. Remember, you cannot choose two answers. You must only choose one. And also remember that you cannot leave a blank space without answering. Make sure that you choose the answer that you think is the one that is correct when you compare it with the other answers that are given. The new economic paradigm is embedded in which policy or policies? So when Mr. Letiani was describing the new economic paradigm, he explained it under two main headings, under the demand side and under the supply side. So always remember that the new economic paradigm is embedded in both the demand and supply side policies. Another example, a focus on the improvement of input efficiency is a characteristic of the what side policy? So when Mr. Letiani was presenting, he mentioned that under the demand side policy, that is when we have the Phillips curve, for example, where the government can trade off between how much inflation and how much unemployment. He even mentioned that if demand keeps on increasing faster than the supply, then inflation will be a problem. So the demand side policy even focuses on monetary policy and fiscal policy, which increases aggregate demand. But the supply side policy, always remember that it focuses on reduction of production cost. It focuses on improving the efficiency of inputs. It focuses on improving the efficiency of market. So in this case, your answer should be B. Then we also have short questions of a middle order for 2 marks. So 2 marks might seem like it is too little, but we want you to practice the short questions of 2 marks of middle order so that you gather more marks. For example, how can deregulation stimulate economic growth? It was explained previously that deregulation is the removal of rules and regulations which hampers the functioning of the market. Who removes these rules and regulations? The government. For example, you'll find that to operate or to enter a certain market, you need to have a license. But if the government removes that regulation, it means that there will be more suppliers who want to enter that particular market and provide the same product. So simply this type of a question, it's how. So you need to think outside the box and apply your knowledge that if the government removes the laws and the rules, then this will make it easier for other suppliers to enter the market and supply more. So even if you write that the reduction of complex legislation could make it easier for businesses to operate, and therefore economic growth could be stimulated, you will get 2 marks. There is a lot of questions for 2 marks relating to business cycles. So just ensure that for every topic, not only business cycles, you practice these 2 marks questions so that you earn more marks. The next question is a question of a middle order. We call it a data response question. Someone is asking, what is a data response question? A data response question can consist of data that is presented to you in the form of a cartoon, in the form of a diagram, in the form of a graph, in the form of an extract or case study, or in the form of a combination of a graph and an extract. So it will depend. So you need to make sure that you study data response questions. After you were taught a particular content, after you learned about it, you gather past exam question papers, you look for data response questions are found where? Are found in section B of our past exam papers. So what you need to master about this type of questions is that they start with easy questions. Then they are scaffolded into moderate questions. Then the last question will be a little bit difficult. So if you practice, remember, practice makes perfect. If you practice a variety of data response questions, even if you can be given or you come across a different data response question, because you shall have practiced, you will have the skill to respond exceptionally well, and out of 10 you can get 10. Number 1, identify the original price in the graph above. This is our graph. D1, this first demand curve, D1, will represent our original demand curve. And then this, let me call it S1. S1, it will represent our original or our initial supply. Remember in grade 10, that is where you were taught how to draw the graph which shows price formation where demand and supply intersect. So this is the graph. So D1 and S1, they will interact at this point, and I will label it E1. At this point, P1 will be the price that will be so charged for sellers, and the buyers, they will be willing to pay that particular price as the sellers are willing to sell at that price. And Q1 will be the quantity that will be sold and demanded. So in this scenario, you'll realize that there is another demand curve, which is D2. So D2 means that demand changed, it shifted. Always remember, if demand curve shifts to the right, it means that quantity demanded has increased. So as it is moving to the right, can you see that supply does not change? Supply does not shift. We still have the original supply curve, which is S1. And this will be our new, E2 will be our new equilibrium point. And if supply does not change, when demand changes, the price will be forced to go up, and we will have a new price, which is P2. And then we will have a new quantity supplied and new quantity demanded, which is Q2. So the question says identify the original price. So P1 will be our original price. 1 mark for that. Remember, I said it starts with easy questions. So this is easy, 1 mark for it. The second question, what will happen to the price if supply does not increase simultaneously with demand? If you were listening, you know the answer. I said that if supply does not change, it remains the same, but demand shifts to the right. Demand is increasing. People are demanding more. Then supply does not change. The price will go up, and this will cause inflation. But because it is just 1 mark, you will just say the price will increase. Even if you say the price will increase from P1 to P2, it's fine. 1 mark. Then the question says, briefly describe the new economic paradigm. You can, because of this words, briefly describe, you don't have to reproduce it the same way as it appears in the textbook. You can describe it in the manner that you understand it. As long as the description is correct, you will earn your 2 marks. If I listened correctly, Mr. Letiani mentioned that with the new economic paradigm, policymakers are discouraged to use only demand-side policies because they do what? They only encourage an increase in aggregate demand. So with the new economic paradigm, we should use both the demand side policies and the supply side policies so that supply increases and then inflation will be solved. So this will be your definition. But remember what I said, you can write it in a manner that you understand it. If it is correct, you will get marks. So the new economic paradigm refers to government policies designed to ensure a high rate of economic growth without supply constraint and price inflation. So what does it mean when we say without supply constraint? We meaning that if demand is increasing, supply should also simultaneously increase so that inflation cannot be a problem. Let's move to the next question. The next question is only for 2 marks, but I want to tell you, after explaining it, this question also qualifies to be an 8-mark question. The question goes like this: how can the government improve the efficiency of markets? Mr. Letiani taught this when you were doing the supply side policy. Remember, the aim of the supply side policy is to ensure that as demand increases, supply also increases. So because we want to improve, he mentioned that under the supply side policy, production costs can be reduced, efficiency of inputs can be improved, and efficiency of markets can be improved. So for now, we want to know how can the government improve the efficiency of markets? Through deregulation. But if you say through deregulation and you stop there, you cannot get your 2 marks because your sentence is not a full sentence. You can say through deregulations or through reduction of laws and regulations and other forms of government controls that interfere in the markets and make the markets free. If markets become free because the laws and rules have been removed, then other businesses will be able to enter that market and produce same product, and supply will increase and also shift to the right. The government can also encourage establishment of new businesses. Sometimes when we encourage businesses to enter a market, the government can even use what? Subsidies or financial incentives or even funding to encourage them to enter the market. Then more of that particular product will be produced or supplied. Government can also invite foreign direct investment, which we call it FDI in an abbreviation. So foreign businesses can be attracted to invest in South Africa, build their businesses here, and they will supply more while at the same time employing people. The government can also remove power imbalances. How? In the market, you'll find that we have monopolies like Transnet, like Eskom, the one that you're familiar with, which is the only supplier of electricity. And electricity is expensive because there are certain protections that the Eskom has. Natural protection, for example. Other businesses cannot enter. But if the government can help in removing those restrictions, other businesses can enter. Maybe that particular natural resource that Eskom maybe has access to, it can be available even to other businesses so that they can enter the market and also provide electricity. Then the supply will increase. Again, the government can remove power imbalances like oligopolies. What is an oligopoly? Oligopoly exists where there are only few suppliers of a certain product. And usually where there are oligopolies, they can come together and fix the prices. And we will think that prices are expensive, are very, very high, only to find that collusion took place, whereby those sellers came together and decided to push the prices up. So the government can regulate that. The government can investigate that and remove such imbalances so that we have free competition. The government can also level the playing field so that private businesses can compete with public enterprises. Remember, public enterprises are the state-owned businesses which most of them are not making profit. And as a result, they are running at a loss and request financial assistance from the government. So this automatically makes competition between public businesses and private sector to compete. So, like Mr. Litiani has mentioned, if the government is giving financial aid to public businesses or public sector, let it also happen to private sector. Or government should remove the financial assistance that it is giving to the public sector so that public sector can also start to operate like private sector and make profit and be accountable if they are running at a loss. So this you can see we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 marks. So that's why I'm saying it also qualifies to be an 8-mark question. So when you study in economics, look for such questions whereby you find that there are more than 4 alternative answers. Know that that can also be an 8-mark question. The last question, draw a graph which illustrates simultaneous increase in demand and supply. When you draw this graph, make sure that the vertical axis, you label it, it's a price axis, and the horizontal is a quantity axis. So first, start with the original. Also label the axis here. I will mention it when I've plotted the demand curve. So first start with the demand curve. So this D is our original demand curve and this is our original supply curve. We want a situation whereby both of them increase. But at this point, which I will label E, it is a point where supply and demand are equal. It is our original equilibrium point. Here, this is a mistake. It should be price and the one above is P1. So this is just P. So it is our original price. So when it happens that people are demanding more, D will shift from D to D1 because there is an increase in demand, and quantity will shift from Q to Q1 because we are demanding more. But if supply does not increase, P1 will be the price, the highest price which we must pay. But in this scenario, we want you to plot another supply curve to show that both have shifted simultaneously. Then your supply curve should also shift to the right. Remember, if supply curve shifts to the left, there is a decrease in supply. If demand curve shifts to the left, there is a decrease in demand. But in this scenario, we want both supply and demand to increase. Always remember that when they increase, they shift to the right. So this will be our new supply curve. Look at the price. Because both supply and demand have increased, look at the price. The price will drop from P1 to P, and this will be our new equilibrium point at quantity number 1. So, but for the mark allocation, for the original supply curve, you'll get 1. For the original demand curve, you'll get 1. For the new supply curve, which is S1, you'll get 1, and for the new demand curve, which is D1, you'll get 1, because the maximum is 4. This is a 4-mark question. If it was an 8-mark question, you will even get marks for showing us the old equilibrium point and the new equilibrium point. The next question is an 8-mark question. We call it a paragraph question of a higher order or of higher cognitive level. I want to change this question. Why is it impossible to achieve zero unemployment and zero inflation in the economy? A low inflation we can achieve, but I've removed low. Why is it impossible to achieve zero unemployment? Full sentences, you'll need 4 sentences. Full sentences, each will get 2 marks. So let us look here. With the demand side policy, remember what is the aim of the demand side policy? To increase aggregate demand. If aggregate demand increases, what else should increase? Production. Production should increase. So who should produce these goods because of an increase in demand? Businesses will require what? Will require workers. And these workers, when they are employed, they will earn what? They will earn money. When they have money, what are they going to do with the money? They're going to spend. For as long as they keep on spending, aggregate demand will keep on increasing. And if supply does not respond, what will happen? We will have inflation. So as long as people are working and unemployment is less, there will be inflation. So, like I've said, that the demand-side policies are effective in stimulating economic growth. It increases the demand for labor and it reduces unemployment. So that's why unemployment will not be at zero. But as unemployment declines or decreases, inflation will do what? Will start to rise. Remember the Phillips curve. Phillips curve says that if unemployment is high, inflation will be low. If unemployment is less, inflation will be high. So this is what is explained here. This is because aggregate demand increases, but aggregate supply does not respond immediately. It becomes sticky and fixed in the short term, but will increase in the long term. But in the short term, when aggregate demand increases, aggregate supply does not increase. That is why inflation will always take place. We are continuing. Because we are demanding more and more people are employed, production will increase. As production is increasing, inflation also increases further, because for you to produce, you need to have more workers. So it has become a normal phenomenon to countries to choose how much unemployment they would like to trade off. So countries can choose how much percentage of inflation they want. But if they do that, it means that they should trade off what? A certain number of workers. Let's look at this graph here. You can see that if unemployment is high at 7%, inflation is less because there's few people who are working. There's few people who have money to spend. Then inflation is a little bit controllable, it is low. That is why I said that I am removing the low, because yes, we can have a low inflation, but a 0.1, when we use Phillips curve to explain, it means that if inflation is 0, then it means no one is working. Hence, I have removed that. So look what happened. If unemployment drops, it becomes 4%. It means many people are working. Look at what inflation does. It increases to 5%. So the government can decide, if the government wants to have an inflation rate of 1%, it means that the government can choose to retrench workers so that inflation is 1%. But if the government wants a higher inflation rate, then it means that more people should be employed. So I'm trying to explain the trade-off. And this phenomenon is illustrated by the Phillips curve that you learned for 8 marks. Let's quickly look at the last question. The last question is an essay type question. It's about the new economic paradigm. Look at the question. It is two-folded. The first part, we call it the main question. It is 26 marks. And then the second part, it is the additional question. We call it the additional part. It is for 10 marks. 26 plus 10 is 36. So for you to answer this question so that it's out of 40, you also need an introduction in the beginning for 2 marks and a conclusion at the end. So we call that an IMAC. IMAC. I for introduction, it is 2 marks. M for main part, 26 marks. A for additional part, 10 marks. And C for conclusion. Okay. So the question says, discuss the new economic paradigm in detail. Because the question is phrased like this, you will have to discuss the demand side policy, and you will also have to discuss the supply side policy. That's what you must do. But if the question was phrased like, discuss the supply side policy to smooth out business cycles, you would go to supply side policy only. But the way it is phrased, you need to discuss both. When you start, you need to start with an introduction, a simple introduction. You can describe what a demand side policy is, or a supply side policy, or what the new economic paradigm is. But you look at the question for you to decide. Don't write, in this essay, I'm going to discuss the demand side policy and the supply side policy with the use of the Phillips curve, etc. Don't do that, because this introduction is only for 2 marks. You might find that the points that you included in the introduction, you might need them in the body. But because you have already written them in the introduction, you won't get marks, because that will be marked as a repetition. So this is just an example. Here we're just trying to improve your skill of essay writing. The new economic paradigm discourages policymakers from using monetary and fiscal policies to fine-tune the economy, but it rather encourages achieving stability through sound long-term policy decisions relating to demand and supply in an economy. That is 2 marks. The main part for 26 marks. For just writing demand side policy, you get your 1. But if you mentioned it in the introduction, you'd forfeit your 1 mark. You should mention what is the demand side policy. Remember, it was done by Mr. Letian, but I will use this as a summary for this lesson. It refers to the measures undertaken by the government to influence aggregate demand in the economy, to increase aggregate demand. Remember, you write in full sentence, you get a 2 mark. But remember that you also have 8 marks in the main part for headings. That is why we gave you 1 for demand side. For headings, for examples, and for subheadings, just for listing. But everything else should be discussed in full sentences. We also encourage the use of bullets or point form so that your information is neat. Even someone who's marking should even see where the mark allocation should be. So, for mentioning that the government will use monetary and fiscal policy to achieve this goal, another 2 marks. For mentioning that households and firms and governments spend more, aggregate demand in the economy increases, 2 marks. For mentioning that this will make the economy grow, but this will lead to inflation. Why? Because supply does not respond, 2 marks. Then you give us another heading. Hence, this heading is 1 mark. All in all, there should be 8. So you will mention that aggregate demand increases more quickly than aggregate supply. And this causes inflation, or this causes price to increase, 2 marks. If you also mention that if the supply does not react to the increase in demand, prices will increase, another 2 marks. If you mention that this will lead to inflation, and you even explain that inflation is the situation whereby there is a sustained and considerable increase in the general price level, you'll get your 2 marks for defining inflation for us. For even bringing the graph, you will get 2 marks for the graph. Why? You just show us that at this point, that is where inflation will take place. If this is our price and demand increases, but supply does not increase, what will happen? There will be inflation at point E. Price will go up. But if supply also increase, price will remain the same, will drop and remain the same where it was originally. Inflation will be prevented. Let's talk about unemployment. That is where the Phillips curve comes in. Remember, in the beginning, we used the demand side policies to increase what? Aggregate spending or aggregate expenditure. So what will happen is that there will be a need for more products. There will be a need for more workers to produce. So economic growth can lead to an increase in the demand of labor. Workers will be needed. 2 marks. As a result, more people will be employed, and unemployment will do what? Unemployment will decrease. Remember what I said? As unemployment decreases, more people are working, they demanding more, supply does not respond, price goes up. Inflation kicks in. As unemployment decreases, inflation is also likely to increase. And this is illustrated where? In the Phillips curve. By describing what a Phillips curve is, you get another 2 marks. By drawing the graph correctly, another 2 marks, showing us the inverse relationship between unemployment and inflation, 2 marks. Then for just writing supply side policy, you get another mark. Supply side policy referred to any measure undertaken by the government to influence the level of aggregate supply. Remember, with demand side policy, the aim is to increase what? Aggregate demand, to increase aggregate spending. But the aim of supply side policy is to do what? To increase supply so that inflation is not a problem. Government might try to stimulate aggregate supply by reducing what? Cost of production, or even improve the efficiency of the inputs or efficiency of markets. 2 marks. But here, because it's just not a full sentence, 1 mark. Reduction of cost of production, 1 mark. So learn to write using headings, because you will get lots of marks. So reducing the cost of production means a greater output and can be supplied at any given price. What does this mean? It means that if the cost of production, remember, businesses they incur cost of production. They pay for electricity. They pay for workers. They buy raw materials. They incur transport costs. All these costs are private costs. But there are certain costs which are brought by the government. So if the government can assist to reduce this particular cost, businesses will produce more. I will show you which are those costs. Government can roll out measures that can reduce the cost of production of businesses directly or indirectly. Remember, directly the government can give businesses what? Financial incentives. But indirectly, what is that the government can do? Remember, electricity is a cost for the business. And the government, through NESA, the government has a say as to whether the price of electricity should go up or go down. So the government can influence the price of electricity to go down. Even the price of fuel, for example, price of fuel, petrol, diesel, and paraffin, the government has a say that the government, if the price goes up, not because of external factors, the government can reduce this RAF, the money that you receive for road accident fund, because that money is funded through the price of petrol, for example. If the government reduce that and even reduce the fuel levy, petrol will be affordable and businesses will produce more and transport more. Other reason why there is a shortage is because it is expensive to produce, because electricity is expensive. It is expensive to transport goods from this particular market to another because transport costs are expensive. But that is where the government will assist by reducing those costs. For example, the government can provide infrastructural services, efficient administration, and reduce less red tapes and no corruption. So, infrastructural service, you will get 1 mark for it. And you will tell us that it involved transport, communication, water, and energy costs often result in substantial cost to businesses. I want to talk about water. Businesses pay rates and taxes where they operate. And those rates and taxes, they also increase production costs of businesses. So if the government reduces rates and taxes, businesses can be able to use that money to produce more and to supply more. So that is why we're saying government can make significant contribution if charges are reasonable and even if services are efficient. Government can also assist in reduction of what? Administrative costs. Those costs which are not directly linked to the production of a product. When we produce certain products, we use electricity. That is directly linked to that. But when we have to pay a chartered accountant or a tax consultant to submit tax returns for the business to SARS, that is another cost. And it is indirectly involved with the production of what we are producing. So that, if can be reduced, can assist businesses to produce more. We can even say government can provide cash incentives to encourage businesses to produce more. Remember the subsidies on production. Government can provide subsidies on production. So this is simply how I wanted to show you that if you write a heading and then you discuss it for a full sentence, you will get your 2 marks. You'll get your 2 marks. But let me go quickly to the additional part. Let's go to the additional part because the rest you did with the previous presenter. Why is it not possible to achieve an equilibrium for the new economic paradigm? It is because it is extremely difficult for the government to fine-tune economic activities. Government cannot fine-tune aggregate demand, cannot control how I spend. Too much spending by us unless if taxation is brought into this. So during a recession, expansionary monetary and fiscal policy needs to be applied. What the government will do, apart from using the supply side policy, the government can decrease taxes during the expansionary, especially during the prosperity phase. The government can So during the recession phase, during the contraction, where the business cycle and business economic activities are declining, the government can use expansionary monetary and fiscal policy to make people to spend more, businesses to spend more. That's when the government can decrease tax, the government can increase spending. Monetary policy, Reserve Bank can decrease taxation and increase supply of money so that there's too much money circulating for spending. And then during the boom, that is during the expansion phase, during the upswing phase of the business cycle, government can cool down the economy by using contractionary policy measures, by increasing taxes to make goods to be expensive, to make workers to have less money. Government can also spend less, inflation will be controllable. Government, monetary policy, Reserve Bank can also increase interest rates so that we don't borrow too much and decrease the supply of money. During a boom or expansion phase, taxes are raised, but unemployment insurance, remember the UIF, uninsurance employment insurance will be paid out. So what happened is that inflation won't be a problem. Why? As people reduce spending because they are unemployed, they will continue spending because they received what? Unemployment insurance. So with this type of a question, make sure that you have five points and then you will get your marks. Let's look at the conclusion. When you write your conclusion, it must be of a higher order. You can bring your own criticism. You can bring your own opinions. Don't write something that was written in the main part or in the introduction. Don't write that in this conclusion, I'm summarizing, I have discussed inflation, Phillips curves, etc. No, we have already awarded you marks in the body. So you can come with a suggestion, a recommendation. So if it is of a lower order, you won't get full marks or you won't even get marks. So in this example, we're concluding by saying real economic circumstances constantly change and becomes extremely difficult to apply one school of thought to fix business cycles. So it becomes difficult to apply only fiscal policy or to apply only monetary policy or to apply only supply side policy. Sometimes you can even write that a combination of these policies can be applicable. Then you will get your 2 marks. Today's lesson ends here. Thank you for watching this lesson, and you can also access it if you use the same link that you used today. You can access it, watch it, you can rewind it, you can pause it if you don't understand. But as we're living, remember to keep a social distance. Remember to always wear a mask. Also remember to sanitize and always wash your hands and don't touch your faces with hands which are not clean. Thank you. Bye-bye for today.